All right. All right. So again, welcome everyone to our next session in our series, I Want to Be a Professional Arrow, Pathways and Opportunities for a New Workforce. Today's session is titled The Explicit Teaching of Collaborative Competencies. And I'm going to introduce our three panelists and then turn it over to them. So first, we'll be hearing from Vicky Klima, who joined Appalachian State University's faculty in 2003. She chairs the Mathematical Association of America's High Impact Practices Working Group, promoting interdisciplinary experiential learning in mathematics classrooms. As interim dean of the Honors College, she supports a multidisciplinary team taught seminar exploring wicked problems using the tools of convergence research. From there, we're going to move on to Dr. Katie Plaisance, who has worked at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada for the past 15 years. She is an associate professor and department chair of knowledge integration, an interdisciplinary undergraduate program that teaches students how to collaborate across disciplinary boundaries and in diverse teams. And then finally, we will hear from Dr. Pips Veazey as the inaugural director of the University of Maine Portland Gateway that was established in 2021 to connect Mainers with world-class research and education. Also to convene teams and prepare our knowledge and innovation workforce and converge around contemporary Maine challenges in the Portland area and beyond. So please join me in welcoming our three panelists today, and I will turn it over to Vicky to kick it off.
Okay. I think I am sharing now. I am Vicky Klima. I am the interim dean of the Honors College at Appalachian State, and I'm talking about a collaboration that we have with the Research Institute for Environment, Ecology, and Economics, which is a research institute at App State, about a Honors College seminar called Research to Action Multidisciplinary Problems. And because we use such long names, we also use a lot of acronyms. So when I talk about the Research Institute for Environment, Ecology, and Economics, I'll call it RIEEE. And when I talk about the course that we're teaching, I'll call it RAMP. So first of all, just a little bit about our setting. App State has a little over 21,000 students, and the vast majority of those are undergraduate students. And 91% of our students are from the state of North Carolina. So we really are a regional, comprehensive, primarily undergraduate institution. We are located in northwestern North Carolina, really in the Appalachian Mountains, and about 31% of our students are first-generation students. The Honors College supports about 550 students in their holistic development through small seminar-style classes with a focus on experiential learning. And RIEEE supports faculty in synthesizing and pursuing high-impact research, building a shared research infrastructure, and expanding opportunities through interdisciplinary networks. So the Honors College has a primarily teaching focus, but honors students do complete research projects. Their culminating senior experience is a research thesis, and RIEEE primarily supports research, but their research involves student researchers because most of the research apparatus is supported by students. We're mostly undergraduates. And so we find this course, this collaboration between honors and RIEEE to really be at that nexus, that intersection of what the Honors College and RIEEE are designed at App State's campus to do. So a little bit about our course. So our course is a sophomore level seminar course. In the Honors College, students take an honors seminar at the first, second, and third year levels. The course, it's a 3-credit-hour course. The course is problem focused. For the past 2 years, that problem has been phosphorus sustainability. And the choice of problem grew from RIEEE's membership in the Science and Technologies for Phosphorus Sustainability STEPS Center, which is an NSF-funded convergence research community of scientists that address the complex challenges in phosphorus sustainability by integrating contributions across physical, life, social, and economic sciences. So STEPS, really, their researchers work to enhance the resiliency of our food systems by reducing our dependency on phosphorus in our fertilizers, while at the same time reducing the environmental damage of the phosphorus that remains in the fertilizers. And this course is focused on this problem, this wicked problem of phosphorus sustainability. It is convergence-centered in that it is taught by a group of faculty who all have different disciplinary expertise, and the faculty are looking to find convergent solutions. And the students that are taking the course are honor students from all different majors. So the students are approaching the course with very different disciplinary interests and different disciplinary talents. And it involves some locally relevant research. So the students for the last half of the course work on research projects under faculty mentorship. And there's usually like 4 to 6 research teams that are each mentored by a faculty member that's working on the course. So 2 iterations ago, there was a team that was studying local organic poultry farms and phosphorus in those farms, a team that was studying local organic dairy farms and the phosphorus at those farms. There was a team that was studying sort of the phosphorus flow in our regional Christmas tree farms. Christmas tree farming is a big deal here in the high country. Like the majority of Christmas trees come from this area and they grow on the side of mountains, and you don't eat a Christmas tree, which means you can put a lot of chemicals on it when you are growing it. And so there's a lot of fertilizer that's used and it runs down the mountain, and they were studying kind of what happens in the soil and the water systems as the phosphorus moves along. And then there was a group that was studying surface water phosphorus modeling in the high country. They looked at stream and water management treatment system measurements. And then there was a group that isn't pictured here, but they looked at policy in North Carolina for all the times that phosphorus showed up in the policies and how that interacted with the other projects. The courses team taught. There are 2 lead instructors. The faculty coordinator was paid for by the Honors College, and the student coordinator was paid for by the STEP grant. She was a postdoc in this for STEPs. And there were also about 3 additional project leaders, and they regularly attended the class meetings. So at many class meetings, there were 5 faculty members. There was the student coordinator, the faculty coordinator, and these 3 additional project leaders. And then the additional project leaders and the faculty coordinator all mentored projects for in the last half of the class. The ramp in general had 3 overarching learning outcomes, and the third one has to do with convergence, so it's relevant for today. It's to carry out convergent research practices to create holistic solutions to wicked problems that cross disciplinary boundaries. That's a lot. That is a huge goal. And I think that when I was doing exit interviews with students for the class, I realized that, well, I think just by reading it, everyone can realize that it's a little bit too big for one 3-hour class. The students often mentioned that all the parts of the class they enjoyed, but they felt like they could do each of them better if they had more time. And so it's kind of my secret goal that we can find some funding to move this one 3-hour class to a sequence of 3 3-hour classes. A first-year seminar, a second-year seminar, and a third-year seminar. So it's fingers crossed. That's my big hope for the project. So the course itself, in the first half of the course, students develop these research skills, and they also develop convergence skills. So they're talking with the 5 faculty members from different disciplines explicitly about their teamwork and conflict resolution, about their epistemic humility, about really understanding that their discipline doesn't have all the answers, and asking meaningful questions about how other disciplines approach the problem. When I was doing those exit interviews, one of the things that the students mentioned the most that they really enjoyed about the class is they got to see their faculty members as experienced learners actually learning. Like they got to see the process of learning happen in front of them, and that helped them model ways that they might be able to explore other topics that they're not experts in the future. And then the last thing is really important. The students that we work with are sophomores and juniors mainly. So they're just learning the specific language of their discipline, and they're really proud of it and they like using it. But if I'm talking in my biology language to someone who's talking in their political science language, we might not understand each other at all. And so this importance of a shared vocabulary and developing a shared vocabulary around the problem so that we can all actually work together and build off of each other is something that the faculty were emphasizing during this first half of the course. Now, in my ideal world, students would develop convergent skills in the first-year seminar. And I think Katie's going to talk to us about a course that does that. So I'm really excited to hear. And then they would actually sort of develop their research skills in the second seminar. And then in the third seminar, they would do what we do in the second half of our current class, which is these mentored research projects with group reflection. And that group reflection is so important. So they're working in small groups, 2 or 3 students with a faculty mentor to do lab or field research. But they're also meeting as a whole class to reflect on the methods, their progress, and the cross-project connections. So how what we're learning at the Christmas tree farm interacts with what you're learning at the dairy farm, which interacts with what the people that are studying policy are learning about sort of North Carolina's overarching approach. And this last bullet, we don't do it now, but I really think it's important. And if we had a whole course, we would definitely do it. And that's to connect what the students are learning in those reflections to competency building. So the students can explicitly say, oh yes, this thing that I did at the Christmas tree farm, that was showing my leadership. Or this thing that I did in terms of helping this group understand what this group was trying to say, that was showing my communication skills. So students really get explicit examples of teamwork, communication, leadership, critical thinking that they could share at internships, with in grad school applications, in job interviews, that they could really sort of market what they are learning through this course to help propel them forward. And then really quickly, back to our original setting. So App State has 6 strategic priorities, and like most universities, one of them is around exceptional education, and one of them is around exceptional research. And I really think that courses like this, or hopefully a sequence of courses, if we're able to build it, really help address both of these ideas. 5 faculty members from all across the university. There was a political sciences, a biologist, a sustainable development faculty member, a faculty member in chemistry, I think environmental science. They were all teaching together, and they were learning from each other in terms of teaching excellence, giving experiential learning opportunities to the students, and students stayed in those labs past the course. And so they were really kind of supporting co-curricular learning. But I think maybe even more importantly, it advances research and innovation at the university because it gives all of these students an opportunity for mentored, supported undergraduate scholarship. And because we are finding 5 faculty members from across the university that share an interest in a problem, that's probably an area of potential identified excellence at the university that we could work on. And my very favorite is this amplifying transformative partnerships. I really feel like the university meant partnerships between the university and industry, but I think this is an example of a partnership between a teaching arm at the university and a research arm at the university that can work together to improve both teaching and research for our students. And I think that's the end of my presentation, and I'm ready to hand it over to Katie, and we'll take questions at the end. And I'm happy to answer any questions by email later on. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. All right. Can everyone see that okay? All right. So my name is Katie Plaisance. As Christine mentioned, I'm an associate professor and the department chair at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. And the Department of Knowledge Integration offers a unique degree. I'm actually going to talk about that first. A Bachelor of Knowledge Integration. It's actually the only one in the world of its kind, and that's basically because we made it up. But the idea behind it is that this degree teaches students explicitly how to collaborate in diverse teams and work across disciplinary boundaries. And it's actually really important in the Canadian context because I actually grew up in the United States and went to school in the United States and was very surprised to find when I moved to Canada that when students come to university in Canada, they, unlike the liberal arts model that you often see in the United States, where students typically apply to a university and often declare a major in their second year, when students at many Canadian universities, students have to know exactly what they're going to do before they even apply to the university. So for example, at the University of Waterloo, students need to know not only if they're doing engineering versus arts, but they need to know, are they doing mechanical engineering or civil engineering? So you need to know early on what you're doing. And then once you're here, you specialize. And so a lot of the students in Canadian institutions don't have the elective space to take courses outside of their own program, which means that you don't have that same sort of liberal arts model of education where students get courses from across the STEM and humanities. So in that context, the Bachelor of Knowledge Integration is really seen as quite radical. There are a couple of other art science programs that span the STEM humanities divide. But even in those programs, they tend to look more like a double major, where students take sort of one humanities arts major and one STEM major. For what we're doing, though, we have students really work across that divide and then take core courses within our program where they're learning the collaborative competencies, as well as framework for collaborative problem solving, like design thinking. All right, so I've been teaching in this program for about the past 15 years. And I think this was about 10 years ago now. In 2014, I was teaching an upper year elective on interdisciplinary collaboration to some of the knowledge integration students. And in one of the classes, a number of them pulled me aside and said, "This is great. I love what we're learning. But the biggest problem we face is not in classes like this. It's when we take classes in other parts of campus where other students don't really know how to work in teams and haven't had the opportunity to work with people in outside the program. And so how do we actually effectively work with students in those programs, or how do we get them on board with the things we're learning in knowledge integration?" So I ended up working with these students to do a workshop and then eventually create an entire course called Making Collaboration Work. And the idea behind that course was to basically take all the things we were doing in knowledge integration, package them together, and offer this course to all students across campus. And the 3 students that I organized it, or that I designed this course with, included Akanksha Madan, who's actually featured in the middle of this picture, Georgia Lamar, and Shane Morgenstein, who are not in here. And so the 3 of us worked together over the course of a year to co-design this course. As I mentioned, we then opened it to all students at Waterloo 2nd year and above. We then got a teaching grant to study the effectiveness of the course in terms of its effect on students' experiences of psychological safety in teams. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Their beliefs about the benefits of diverse perspectives in teams, and students' attitudes about the value of teamwork. So what I'm going to be talking about is not just this class that we designed for students across the university, but actually a study that we did to look at the effects this class had in terms of student outcomes and to see how effective it was in these 3 domains. Okay, so in terms of designing the course, we wanted to include both collaborative theory and practice. So because this is short, I'm not going to give a really detailed overview, but basically in terms of collaborative theory, we covered things like Tuckman's model of group formation, Lencioni's model of or work on the 5 dysfunctions of a team. We looked at the role of trust in teams, different types of conflict, so productive and destructive conflict, psychological safety, and the benefits of diversity. And psychological safety and diversity were 2 that were really important to me, and also that research shows that psychological safety in particular is one of the #1 predictors of team success. If you're not familiar with psychological safety, it is basically a construct that captures the extent to which a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It's probably most well studied by Amy Edmondson in organizational behavior. And is typically studied at the team level. And it measures things like to what extent somebody feels safe to take risks, not only to take risks, but to the extent to which they feel like they can make a mistake in a team, that it will not be held against them, that they feel like they can share wild ideas and be themselves. And so this is actually really important for teams that need to be creative and innovative. And in terms of creativity and innovation, research also shows that having diverse perspectives is really important. And so we thought it'd be important to put those 2 things together. And so we wanted to include that in the collaborative theory, but actually look at the extent to which those students' sort of attitudes and perceptions of psychological safety and diversity were altered as a result of taking the class. So we covered that theory through readings and discussion and lectures in the class. We also interspersed the lectures with collaborative practice. So in addition to teaching all this material to students, we did 2 group projects. So we put them in 2 different teams, each one working for about 5 weeks on a design challenge. And the collaborative practices we had them do included creating team charters. We did the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative. If you're not familiar with it, if you just Google Toolbox Dialogue Initiative, you can find out more about that. And that's a way to get a team to try to understand these sort of assumptions underlying their perspectives. And I think Steve Fiore put something in the chat about how people in different disciplines will use different kind of language. The Toolbox Dialogue Initiative can help with that as well. We had them do brainstorming activities. We taught them how to give and receive constructive feedback and to do peer evaluations to keep team members accountable, as well as to help them to improve the work that they're doing on teams. Okay, so in terms of the, sorry, let me just say a little bit more about the course design. So we taught them the collaborative theory, we did the collaborative practice, had them work in each of these teams. And so after each one of the group projects, we also had students individual writer reflection, talking about their experience and using some of the collaborative theory that we taught them as a lens to sort of understand their experience. But in order to evaluate how the course sort of met the learning objectives, we focused more on quantitative methods. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. So we surveyed 2 cohorts for the class, one fall 2018, which had 33 students, and one was fall 2019, which had 25 students. As it turned out, we were able to get students from all 6 faculties on our campus. So we had students from engineering, health, environment, arts, math, and science. And every team, and then when we put the students together in teams, every team had about 5 students on it. And each team included, I think, at least 3 or 4 different faculties. Every team had at least 2 students, or had multiple gender students with multiple gender identities, multiple racial identities, and different years of studying and programs. So I think we had 4 different kinds of diversity on every team. What we did then is we surveyed students at 3 time points. So we surveyed the students before we even put them in teams at the very beginning of the course. This was our pre-course survey. We then surveyed them after we taught them everything and they did their 2 group projects and their reflections at the very end of the course. That was our post-course survey. And then we wanted to see what things looked like after the following term, when 4 months had gone by and they'd had some new contacts. So we surveyed them. This was the follow-up survey 4 months later. What we found was that the course seemed to work quite well in terms of the different outcomes we were looking at. So in terms of psychological safety, we saw from pre to post a moderate to large increase in terms of students' perceptions of psychological safety on their teams in the class. Even within the next term follow-up, this increase persisted in these new contexts. In terms of their attitudes towards teamwork, we saw a moderate increase pre to post, not quite as big as psychological safety, but still a pretty good size increase. In the follow-up the next term, we actually didn't, if you compare pre-course to the follow-up, we didn't actually see that increase, so it didn't persist. But we did ask them some questions about their views around teamwork sort of in the future. And we did then see it we did see that increase come back, suggesting that the students had some optimism around the value of teamwork, generally speaking, even if their experience wasn't quite as positive that following term. Then finally, we asked them about their beliefs about the value of diversity, and we found a moderate increase pre to post. We did not test the follow-up, long story, but we did not test the follow-up for that, so we don't have data on that. We then had some recommendations for instructors in terms of what we saw from our data, as well as really the course design and everything we learned and discussions we had with students. So just 5 key takeaways. One is really the key takeaway from today's panel, to teach these collaborative skills explicitly and not assume that students will automatically know how to work in teams. Secondly, teach the students about the value of diversity and diverse perspectives. That's really important for getting students to see why integration is crucial in teamwork and why they shouldn't merely divide and conquer. Third is discussing concepts like psychological safety and having students brainstorm ways to cultivate a positive team climate. Fourth is design your course in a way that students actually have an opportunity to learn about collaboration, actually do some collaboration and reflect on it. So rather than pulling these things apart and teaching them separately. And then finally, I think it's important to emphasize collaborative process in addition to products. So we actually had students submit their deliverables that were focused on process, including their team charters, their brainstorming maps, and I think the feedback that they gave one another when they did their team design charrettes. And so lastly, I'll just mention that we've written this up and it's been accepted in the Canadian Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. It's going to be coming out in the December issue. So if you're interested in an advanced copy, once we're done with the copy editing phase, I can send that to you. And then you can see the details I had to gloss over today. But hopefully that gives you a glimpse into the course and what we found in terms of the effectiveness of the course.
Okay, thanks, Katie. I'm gonna follow up with my presentation, and I'm gonna share my screen here. Okay, so my name is Pips Veazey. I am at the University of Maine. I've been at the University of Maine for about 3 years. And prior to that, I spent a long time at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. So I'm going to talk about some work that I did in Alaska and how some of that has shifted to the University of Maine. When I was in Alaska, I was part of the Alaska EPSCOR project, which is a major capacity building project for the National Science Foundation. So we had a very interdisciplinary team of people that was probably about 100 people total with project partners. And we were looking at both changes that were happening along coastal margins and boreal fires. So it was a large research project that was happening across the state of Maine. We also had a big diversity education and workforce component, and then a big data management component. So we were working at scales of, 1,000 or 1,500 miles, and looking at to see how Alaska was changing in these different regimes. So it was a very interdisciplinary group of people, many of whom were used to working in an interdisciplinary setting, but some of them, this was their first time. So it was a great way to kind of start a career in interdisciplinary science and education. As a result of that project, we started a doctoral level interdisciplinary research peer group and ended up with, I think, 8 people graduating with interdisciplinary degrees as a result of that project. So we spent a couple of years putting this together. It was funded through the project that we were running, and was this wonderful kind of cohort experience. And I was a doctoral student in that experience. So just to give you kind of a sense of how we structured things, we put together a core credit flow of 3 different years, the first 3 years for this cohort experience. And each semester we offered 3 credits. 2 credits were based on a research process. And you can see that in year 1, they start with a research design overview, a mixed methods, research design for a year for the 2-semester period. And then there was also a seminar that was associated in each one of those semesters. And because we were studying Arctic social ecological systems research generally, these topics were all kind of related to Arctic interdisciplinary research. So Arctic policy, Arctic governance. In year 2, we looked at hydrology, land use, and landscape change policy, and we looked at hazards. And then in year 3, the seminar went on to mapping and remote sensing, and the human dimensions of social sciences. And so the research process piece kind of fell or transitioned along each year to kind of support students where they were in their own research process. So this is the degree program that we put together for our cohort. And at the same time, we created this space that our cohort met in regularly called the visualization space. Steve was part of this, Steve Fiore, who's on here. I can see him smiling, was part of supporting this work. And this was a really amazing place to do work as an interdisciplinary team, not only the research team, but also for our cohort to be able to access all this information together and to be able to share things, together and be able to discuss information. So that was, we created this space based on other spaces that have been created in other institutions as a way of bringing people together to talk about these complex challenges that we were all facing. Just as a side note, because this was also supported by the National Science Foundation, a number of the EPSCOR states just created a resource guide for postdoc researcher development, and in it is a collaboration and team science section that several of us led. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm happy to share that. But that was what ended up being a 4-year grant because of COVID, putting together a resource guide for postdoctoral development. So now I am at the University of Maine and working on this course that is built to bring together an interdisciplinary approach to education at the University of Maine in a kind of a more coordinated way than has been happening. So I'm now the director of the Portland Gateway, and Ann Heberger Marino, who is on here as well, is the other half of me in this endeavor. And we are hosting this interdisciplinary graduate class that I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about. It's called Complex Problem Solving for Future Leaders, and it's co-taught by 12 people across 3 different universities. And so we spent 2 years working to develop this coalition of 12 people across 3 different universities. Most of them are at kind of the dean and director level. And this was a complex problem in and of itself, trying to figure out how people would want to do this, would be willing to do this, and how we would get it cross-listed. This was not an easy thing, and it took a long time to kind of bring together the coalition. Luckily, it had been started already by 2 senior faculty members, one from Maine Law, who's an Arctic law scholar, and another, Dr. Paul Majewski, who runs the Climate Change Institute at the University of Maine. So they had this vision for doing something similar. And when Ann and I and Paul and Charles got together, we developed it into what exists today. But part of the fun for me was spending time developing or just trying to create the mechanism for doing this. And I think as higher education changes, we're going to see more and more of this. As higher education changes and some universities are not able to do everything that they want to do, I think coalitions are going to develop that are going to allow us to work across some of those boundaries that exist right now. So this was, I think, a really interesting, I really enjoyed supporting that coalition and leading some of these conversations. So I'm going to give you a sense of what we did throughout the class. And I'm going to start with this kind of notion that the University of Maine got a $250 million gift from a private foundation called the Harold Althon Foundation. And one of the goals of the foundation was to bring together business law and policy. None of those topics I have spent a lot of time learning about because I've been embedded in research and science. So I thought, well, here's this great opportunity to bring together business law, policy, and research and some of the sciences. So we had a lot of support in our university for having a very, very interdisciplinary, broadly focused course that really attracted about half of our students. We had 10 students, and I actually have to step back for a sec. This was a heavy lift to get on the books and get it publicized. So we only got it out the day before classes started, or maybe the week before classes started. We still had 10 people sign up for it. So I think people are really, we heard lots of people say they really wanted to take classes like this. What was I going to say? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we have addressed in each of the classes, starting with Paul Majewski, who I mentioned, who's the director of the Climate Change Institute. He created this tool called the Climate Reanalyzer, and it's a really powerful tool if you want to look at if you want to make forecasts and do scenarios that show you what the climate might look like into the future. Charles Norkey is an Arctic law scholar. Amanda Lynch is a climatologist. So they were talking about climate and law and how people are dealing with that around the world. And they gave students an exercise to solve the war in Ukraine and climate change in 15 minutes. We also talked about structured decision making. We had a sports business management expert talk about sports management and decision making. And these were deans and directors. So the lift to teach a class on decision making that involved lots of different kinds of inputs was not a heavy lift for the deans and directors, and they got to talk about some of their programs, so it benefited them as well. So we talked about remote sensing and the change of vegetation over time. In our program in Alaska, remote sensing was incredibly important as a way of bringing together information, to show information, to have conversations that lots of people from different disciplines could come together and explore. We talked about some of my research on team science competencies and why and what makes an effective team. I started my dissertation right when the National Academy's effective team publication came out, which was very handy. So Anne and I in this course talked about developing a shared understanding, about collaboration plans, about developing common languages, many of the things that Katie and Vicky talked about. And we saw those show up in the final papers, which I'm going to talk about very briefly. We talked about other ways of bringing together of complex information and thinking about complex information. We had people who were part of USAID and had worked overseas and were thinking about like very different kinds of decision making on the ground. We talked about artificial intelligence and digital twins, and had experts who were using artificial intelligence to look at the health of forests and how people were planning forestry. So all of the sessions are talking about interdisciplinary complex problems, especially that Maine is facing, but things that were relevant to the rest of the world. We had a session on negotiation by the person who leads the World Affairs Council in Maine. And then we had a group from the Research Development Office and the Entrepreneurship Office talk about business development and bringing together ideas to get them out into the world. And then students did these. So we would meet once a week for 2 hours. We'd have a class. Many of the classes were, they were all online, so people could join from wherever they were. And students were asked to do projects at the end, bringing together these elements that they had been learning about. And those final projects range from things like solving complex problems in Russia and thinking about the resources that are there and how decisions are made, and what we're doing right now as Russia is becoming less and less integrated into the conversations in the Arctic at the moment. The PFAS problem and the how we're addressing PFAS, what it means for people, what it means for food systems. How policies are being made to address the challenges that Maine specifically is seeing in that realm. Thinking about the climate and the workforce, Maine has an incredibly strong climate plan. So thinking about the workforce that is going to evolve around that climate plan and where people can find jobs in Maine. Another student did a project on evolving business and education in higher education and what that means for the future of higher education. So these were the kinds of projects that students did. And we're looking for, this was just our first semester to do this. But one of the things that I really liked about offering this and coming together to teach this is that the law students and the science students and the business students, who were kind of our core base of 10, 10 students had very different ways of thinking about things, had different methodologies, had different, even kind of responses to, you have to write a 15-page paper. That was like, for law students, that was just a given thing. For science students, they're like, what? Wait, why do we have to do another paper? So it was a really, I think, back to somebody's point at the beginning, where both the teachers, the professors, and the students were learning together, I think it was a really interesting experience in that regard for our students as well. Let's see. The final projects, the students spent a lot of time on. They came together and gave presentations. We had hoped to get people together in person at some point during the semester, and we had that planned, and there was a major well, it was a major shooting incident in Maine that prevented us from doing that, because that was the day that we were all going to get together. But I think an in-person event to bring students together and spend a day face-to-face is really important, and I would like to make sure that happens in the process. But this process of shared learning that I think we all felt took place was a great result of the class. So I'm going to stop there and happy to take questions with everybody else.
Thank you all so much for these wonderful talks and for sharing all of this great work. There is a bunch of chatter happening with like requests for resources and stuff. And so I just want to, I'm going to put a link in the chat. The panelists today had wanted to put together a shared resource folder that could aid in the sharing of some of these resources that the panelists have shared today, but also if there are others in the community for teaching collaborative skills, then we can put that into this shared folder. So I'm going to put a link to that into the chat right now. And are there any other questions, or are there any questions, period, from the group? Okay, Deanna.
Good morning, and it's beautiful and sunny Tucson, Arizona, and those mountains behind me do not represent my environment. So Pips, thank you so much for the presentation. Vicky and Katie, is incredibly valuable information. And one of the things that I heard you say, Pips, was the importance of that in person, right? And so when I think of the collaborative process, and then I also think about belonging, accessibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, and I really think the result is when we apply that well, the equity piece, we get justice. And couldn't agree more with the interpersonal connection and how important it is just for our social, mental health and well-being of communing. How do you address really accessibility in a way when COVID has really allowed us to do so much virtually? And I think, there are folks that for a variety of reasons, just the in-person isn't available to them. So what kind of things, and again, this is open to everyone, that you have been doing to really have an inclusive space for those who are limited to participation virtually from a virtual perspective only?
Yeah, that's so important, Deanna. I'll answer quickly, but then also pass it off to my fellow presenters. I think for our team in COVID really shifted. We were already a virtual team when COVID happened because we were working across scales of 1,500 miles. So we had a very virtual team to begin with. But what shifted for our team in COVID is that we spent more time listening to each other and explicitly listening to each other during like working meetings. And taking time to say, how is everybody doing? And taking time to say, hey, I remember, you were telling me about your grandfather last week. How is he doing? Like, how are things going for you? Can I help you? Do you need something? And encouraging people to also be explicit about what they needed. So that radically shifted for our team. I felt like we were kind of doing that before, but that turned into a much more explicit practice. So I'm going to start with that, and I'll pass it off to other people because I know there's other great ideas.
I can say something about that. So the classes that, I mean, the class I was talking about, making collaboration work, I have taught it since COVID started. When I taught it, we were back in person. So students were mostly coming in person, but sometimes students were sick or for other reasons, sometimes mental health reasons, couldn't make it to class. So I basically just, like when students had time to work in class, I told them that if they had a team member who couldn't be in class that day for whatever reason, but was available, I would find them space where they could set up their laptops and like Zoom that student in. And then I also recommended to them that they have discussions about, are they meeting in person? And if they can't all meet in person, that they set something up where other people could meet online, and that they be like mindful of things like, are some people commuting, and, and just like people's sort of life circumstances, and checking in on that. And so when they do team charters, I have them not just talk about things like, well, what are your skill sets and things like that, but also what are some things that you want your team members to know that might be useful in terms of like, making the team work well for you.
Is
So-
anyone using virtual reality to like be able to meet all of your colleagues in a virtual space with your avatar? I work with a colleague and I will never meet her in person because she works 100% remote because of her medical conditions. And I'm really trying to come up with like, how do we, when there's an in-person, how do we do that? And I'm like, is anyone using virtual reality?
We experimented with that, Deanna, in that visualization space that I mentioned. We experimented with a bunch of different things that I thought were super exciting, and I think a lot of progress has been made since we started doing it. But we would have a 360-degree camera in the middle of the room so people could see, just having those screens spread across, so you felt like you were kind of immersed in the information and the event. But I think there's probably some really interesting things that are happening now that take that further. But that's something that I would love to explore. I was in Hawaii last week with a group that's really doing amazing work. They're doing a lot of data visualization, and they have this thing called the Cyber Canoe. Jason Lee is the PI of that project, and it's a very indigenous data-driven project, and they use a lot of technology across the island. So if you're interested in that project, I can, and Jason and some of his colleagues are involved with another project that's happening out of Montreal right now that's all about indigenous ways of knowing and the data challenges that go around that, all sorts of other things that open up lots of interesting conversations.
Vicky, did you have something you wanted to add there?
So the Honors College is a residential learning community. And so the latest iteration, students were living on campus. And so I don't think there were the same challenges with in-person learning that there might be at, say, other institutions. But Kimberly Bourne is here, and she was the postdoc that worked on the class. So Kimberly, you might be able to share more about how you dealt with students who had issues about it being able to attend.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. We were at a little bit of a unique situation in that I am actually remote. I live in a different part of North Carolina, so I was zooming in to the class periods anyways. So we had but I also wasn't lecturing consistently or leading a project. I was mostly doing background work, so that worked really well. So we kind of discourage students from utilizing virtual as an option regularly. It was more if you're sick, if you really have to be gone, we have it available and ready for you to use. But for us, it was really beneficial because, especially because it's sophomore level students who have a lot of questions. I find that in person is a lot easier for students to engage. So we really encourage that in-person component rather than taking advantage of the kind of virtual component consistently. And of course, that's a case-by-case basis. That's not like, we weren't hard and fast about that.
Yeah. And when I conducted the exit interviews, I think those students really valued the input from the other students in the course. And so having everybody together in the same space, I think sometimes helps people feel more free to offer that input.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there other questions for our panelists today? Okay. Well, thank you so much to our panelists for sharing all of this great work. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next session. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day and the wonderful rest of the winter.
I think there's a question.
Oh yeah,
Craig has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to
Greg, sorry, go for it.
I was trying to find the buttons over here. And this may be something that's not really on color for this conversation. But I'm from a background of what I call immersive like methodology. So like there's a very specific structure that I use to conduct all types of meetings, and it starts off with and then a check-in question. And it's often the check-in question. It's not like what's your favorite flavor of ice cream, or you're a cat person or a dog person or anything like that. It's actually a question that's tied to the goals of the meeting. And I feel like, like a lot of times I do this, and I get a lot of pushback from participants and leadership because, we don't have time for that. And I also see that opportunity at like a learning moment. So just a quick example, I was in charge of like 16 community meetings and teaching the leaders of those groups how to do these meetings. And I was conducting a meeting, and we started off with the question of where do you get your news, right? Just where do you get your news? It took 13 people 30 minutes to answer that question. And at the end of the meeting, everybody pointed a finger and started throwing arrows at me because it's like, we blame Craig for having that question. But I'm like, Craig didn't talk for 30 minutes, guys. Like, like we all did that. So, that's a learning point in how to communicate and the effective communication, and, the takeaway was brevity is an act of kindness. But then I also do these interactive exercises. And I like the point someone made earlier about taking the time to reflect, because that's actually when the learning actually happens. It's when you do something and then you reflect on what you did and you take away one or two gems or whatever the case may be. But I get pushback so much from everybody that I work with. But after they do it, they're like, oh, I get it. You know what I mean? But when we go to other meetings, they're like, yo, we don't have time for that. So I'm just wondering if you guys have any strategies or, I don't know, any ideas about how to kind of lean into, leadership and the folks that have the power to be open to these type of immersive things.
I mean, I'll just say, it's easier when you're in the instructor because you can teach this stuff to your students. And we do this. I teach all this stuff like check-ins and things like that to our students, and they typically do it with their teams. And it's part of building trust in groups. And we talk about why that's really important. And when we went virtual, it was one of the things that I said, like Pips was talking about this, right? I said, the one thing you really, really need to do when we went virtual, and we're still doing teamwork, was making sure that they weren't losing those check-ins. But our department, it's really interesting. Our department chair who started our previous department chair, I'm the department chair now, previous department chair who started our program about 15 years ago, who's an engineer, one of the things he put into practice when he started it was check-ins. And we spent anywhere from the first 15 minutes to a half an hour of our department meetings every month doing a check-in. And we have anywhere, like we have, I don't know, 7 or 8 people usually in our department, and it can take us that long. And we are an incredibly high functioning department. So everybody else thinks we're like weird for doing it. And then simultaneously, everybody else complains about how toxic their department is. So, I just basically try and, say to people like, I know that it takes time, but I try and put it in terms of an investment, and that doesn't always work, but it's a short-term investment that it's a small investment that pays off. And you can't always see the payoff in the short term. And the other thing I will do is point to research and just say like, research shows that trust is incredibly important for team, or psychological safety, right? Or trust is really important for teams to function well. Departments are teams, faculties are teams, things like that. One of the best ways to cultivate psychological safety and trust is for people to get to know each other and be able to be vulnerable. Check-ins is one of the ways to do that. Sort of work backwards. Here's the argument. So I know it's taking time to do it, but actually, if we want to get to successful outcomes, this is what the research says. It's not me. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
All right, I see we're at time. Thank you guys so much for the great discussion and all of the wonderful work. And we look forward to seeing everyone again in our next session. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.